morning. I'm Cindy Aronson. I'm Director of the Latin American Program here, along with Vice President for Programs, Andrew Seeley. It's our pleasure to welcome you to this session with Frank de Lima, who is Panama's Minister of Finance and also Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Inter-American Development Bank. So it's a very busy,
March, yes.
There you go, very busy week. There are copies of his bio that are available outside, so I won't go into depth about it, but he's had a number of roles in the government of Panama. He was Deputy Minister of the Economy from 2009 to 2011, also a coordinator of the service sector in the public policy unit within the World Bank, United Nations, where he has had responsibility for issues of competitiveness and financial sector reform. I'm assuming, Minister de Lima, that you're here in connection with the World Bank IMF meetings that are taking place in town this week, and we welcome you to the Wilson Center and look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the Wilson Center for hosting this event, and I want to just point out that Panama's new ambassador to the OAS is President Ambassador Vallarino. He was Vice President of Panama back in the Mireya Moscoso administration. So just want to, I think he's been here for a month now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Panama obviously has been one of the highlights of Latin America in economic growth in the last couple of years. Panama has had an average economic growth of over 8.5% in the last 10 years, and in the years 2011, 2012, Panama had the highest economic growth of all Latin America. We grew 10.8% in 2011 and 10.7% in 2012. And the important thing is not just that we're having this economic growth, but the positive effects that economic growth is having in our country and our society. For example, poverty levels have been reduced from 38% back in 2006. They're currently at 25.8%. Extreme poverty has been reduced from 17% in 2006 to a little bit over 10% as of 2012. Unemployment has dropped from 6.5% back in 2009. It's now at 4%. So what economists would call fully employed labor force is economy is what we have in Panama. What are the drivers that are generating this growth? You know, Panama is much more than the canal. It's much more than our financial center. I think the key to Panama's recent being the last 10 years, strong economic growth has been the fact that we've learned to take advantage of our geographic position. Since the Spanish colonies, Panama has always been a country or a place of transit of commerce. Gold that was produced or mined back in Peru and other South American countries, Bolivia, would pass through Panama on its way back to Spain. The first transcontinental railway was built in Panama. So when the gold rush started back in the 1850s in San Francisco, speculators or prospectors from the U.S. Eastern coast would take a ship, go down to Panama, take the train, and then head back to the west coast of the United States, going through Panama. So Panama, like I said, has always been a place of commerce, and we have that very installed in our DNA, and that's why you see that Panama is basically a service-oriented country. 75% of our economy is service-based. Like I mentioned, we have one of the regional's most important banking centers. The World Economic Forum recently rated Panama's banking center as the 6th most sound in the world. We have close to $90 billion in assets. We have over 90 banks operating in our banking center. Even during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, our banking center maintained the same level of assets. We didn't have any growth, obviously, but, you know, in difference with other banking centers who had a contraction or loss of assets, we maintained the same levels and quickly recuperated growth levels of close to double digits after the year 2009, 2010. Other factors that have driven Panama's economic growth is the Colón Free Zone. We have the world's second largest free zone after Hong Kong. And this free zone moves over $30 billion in merchandise, mostly exporting to our regional neighbors, for example, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, the Caribbean islands, Central America. During the 1990s, structural reforms were implemented in Panama. We privatized state-owned entities such as the ports. Back in 1996, our ports moved a little bit over 250,000 containers a year. Last year, our ports moved close to 7 million containers. And we're developing 2 new port concessions, one on the Pacific side and one on the Atlantic side. We also privatized the state-owned telecommunications company and the state-owned energy companies. We also developed or positioned ourselves as a tourist attraction. Back in the 80s, Costa Rica was the star of tourism in Latin America, or in Central America, sorry. Last year, Panama had over 2 million visitors to our country. Just so you have an idea, Costa Rica had 2.2 million, so we're quickly catching up to Costa Rica as a tourism destination. The New York Times, back in the year 2012, stated that Panama was the #1 tourist attraction, according to that prestigious newspaper. Why? We have biodiversity. When Panama was created, it joined 2 continents, so you have the biodiversity of both in animal life that you don't find anywhere else and plant life. We have great fishing. We have, obviously, with the free zone and all that merchandise that moves through our canal, we are quickly becoming a shopping destination, especially for tourists from South America and Central America who, for reasons that we all know, don't want to travel to the United States because of all the hassles in getting a visa, et cetera. So we're finding a lot of Brazilians coming to Panama, for example, to shop. And we're becoming also a regional headquarters for multinational companies to establish themselves. We have close to 90 multinational companies in Panama. Companies such as Caterpillar, Dell, Unilever have set up their regional headquarters in Panama. We have the Panamanian, thank you, airline, which is Copa. It's traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Copa flies to every country in the American continent. It has several destinations in the United States, and I want to mention a few: Washington, D.C., New York, Boston as of July, Miami, Chicago, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. Copa is growing at close to 20% a year, and it moved over 8 million passengers last year. And the fact that Copa has this great connectivity within the American continent makes it easy for the executives of these multinational companies that have established their regional headquarters in Panama to travel to their other offices in the region. So I think that's another attractive aspect of our geographic position. We are really in the heart of the American continent. The sectors that are generating this growth: mining. Mining is becoming a new industry in Panama. There's a Canadian mining company called Inmet, which was recently acquired by First Quantum, that is starting a copper mining project in Panama. We're talking about an investment of $6.2 billion. And just to put that in perspective, the Panama Canal expansion is $5.3 billion. So this is even larger than the Panama Canal expansion. And we expect them to ramp up within the next 4 to 5 years. They'll be investing close to $1 billion yearly until they get the mine up and running. And this mine will be producing between $80 and $100 million a year to the Panamanian government in royalties. Obviously, construction, the government is pushing forward a rather ambitious public investment program, mostly focused on improving Panama's competitiveness and productivity in areas such as logistics. Obviously, we have the Panama Canal and we have our ports that I mentioned before, but we are also investing in the Panamanian International Airport, known as Tocumen. We're doubling its capacity with the new airport terminal that's being built for close to $700 million. We're also rehabilitating or expanding other regional airports in Panama, sort of what the Dominican Republic has done to make Panama's tourist destinations much easier to get to. We're building a new convention center in Amador, which is a former U.S. naval base, and where there's Frank Gehry is building a museum. It should be open to the public by the end of the year. This is a museum to show off Panama's biodiversity. So with this new convention center and the museum, I think that Panama will also become a destination for conventions. And with the signing of the tax information exchange agreement that Panama had with the United States back in 2010 or 11, U.S. companies can deduce or deduct their expenses of conventions held in Panama. So we're betting that Panama will become a convention destination. Our financial center, like I mentioned, is also growing at 10%. Not only do we have a strong banking center, we have a strong also insurance companies in Panama, companies such as AIG, Generali, which are multinational companies, obviously, some strong local companies that have become regional. Commerce, like I mentioned, with the free zone and the shopping is also growing at close to 9%. So I think that all these factors have contributed to Panama's strong economic growth. The Panama Canal expansion project is running a little bit behind schedule. It's about 6 to 8 months behind schedule. It should be completed by mid-2015. It's still under budget. I studied in Boston, so I know the cost, the delays and the cost overrun and the big dig. So I think in that sense, the Panama Canal Authority has done a very good job in administrating and making sure that the Panama Canal expansion project, like I said, it comes in on time and under budget. The government of President Ricardo Martinelli, when assumed office in July of 2009, had a vision of being very proactive in attracting foreign direct investment to our country. Last year, foreign direct investment was over $3 billion. So if we look at it as a percentage of GDP, our GDP as of the end of 2012 was close to $36 billion. $3 billion is it's a little bit over 9% of GDP. We're seeing a lot of investment from Colombian companies, from European companies, and yesterday we were doing the rounds on the Hill to promote Panama within 4 U.S. companies also as a place to do business. And we've been working strongly in improving our competitiveness as a country. We've improved 19 positions in the World Economic Forum as of 2009 to 2012. Panama is the region's second most competitive country behind Chile. Chile is number 33. We obtained investment grade for the first time in the year 2010, and we received upgrades in the years 2011 and 2012 from the 3 main rating agencies. We're at BBB right now. Our debt is, we'll be going to the markets pretty soon to do a liability management, and there's a strong appetite for Panamanian debt in the international markets, but we've been working also in developing our local capital markets. Just so you have an idea, and back in 2009, 92% of our total debt was international, only 8% was domestic. As of the end of last year, 25% of our debt was domestic and 75% was international. So we've been working strongly in developing our local capital markets. Any other things I want to highlight? I mentioned our investment plan. We're focused a lot in improving the connectivity between our main logistical centers, between the ports on the Atlantic side, the ports on the Pacific side, the international airport. So we're doing investments in building a highway from Panama City, which is on the Pacific side, to Colón, which is the main city on the Atlantic side. As I mentioned, the investments in infrastructure for airports. We're also building the first line of the subway system, a metro system, which will eventually have 3 to 4 lines to improve the public transportation within Panama City. We're changing the bus system to a modern bus system. It's been a little bit traumatic, but these things take time and people have to get used to them. Obviously, the Panama Canal is being expanded, and also we're investing strongly in improving our educational system. We have established what we call the Universal Scholarship, which is a $20 a month scholarship for kids in public schools. They maintain a C average, and the idea behind this scholarship is to create incentives for kids to remain in school. We all know that the more schooling you have, the more capacity you have in the future for wage earnings. So we've seen a decrease in desertion, and especially in high school, of about 20%. 50% of kids before that finish elementary school will not finish high school. That figure has dropped to 30%. So now we are in the rush of building new educational infrastructure. We're building about 13 to 15 what we call schools of excellence nationwide. We are modernizing the school curriculum to put it in line with the necessities of the private sector and the tendencies in the future. We're also investing in human capital development in our INADE, which is professional training programs to train people to use, for example, as construction is one of the key drivers in economic growth, to use the heavy equipment, to work in hotels. Like I mentioned, tourism is one of the key drivers in economic growth and job creation. We're also investing in improving health coverage nationwide. We're building new hospitals, new health centers around the country. We're building 5 new hospitals nationwide, investment of over $400 million. We're building also 25 new regional health centers at a cost of close to $250 million. Health coverage is universal in Panama, as well as education. And we're also spending heavily in security. We have purchased radar systems to cover our country. We have over 1,100 kilometers of coastlines, both on the Atlantic side and the Pacific side. Obviously, Panama is a bridge from the drug-producing countries to the drug-consuming countries. So we're working with the other Central American countries, with the United States, obviously, with Homeland Security, with Colombia, with Mexico, and having a regional strategy to combat organized crime and drug trafficking. I think those were the main points, and I think the most important part of this meeting would be the Q&A session, so we can have a chance to hear your opinions or what ideas or what questions you might have, so we might be able to clarify. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very clear presentation and overview. It's just remarkable how different Panama is from the other countries of Central America, both in terms of the dynamism of the economy and the ability to take advantage of globalization in ways that other countries really can only dream. We welcome comments and questions. Please identify yourselves by name, by institution. Let us know who you are. We may, I think, probably take a couple of questions and then
Sure.
and then come back to you. I actually have one that I'd like to put on the table too. We know, and you mentioned at the end of your remarks, that Panama is in a very difficult neighborhood, and part of that neighborhood is not only the activities of organized crime, but also the sort of staggering levels of just crime and violence and citizen insecurity. And I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on whether that is a problem, in Panama. One would suspect that it is not, given the levels of employment and opportunity that have been created. But anyway, I just would be interested in some remarks on that. Floor is open. Sure, go ahead.
I have a question. You had, my name is Kristen.
Yeah, we're recording.
Kristen Calandrali, and you mentioned 2 things: Martinelli's vision for kind of foreign direct investment, as well as the tax information exchange agreement that had been signed with the U.S. And given kind of a few of these things and Panama's upcoming review about all its tax transparency policies in the OECD, I was a little surprised to read in the press a week or two ago about Panama suspending its discussion about immobilizing bearer shares, which has been, I know, the OECD and all of those groups have kind of pressured Panama on that as a key money laundering vulnerability. And so I was just wondering if you could provide any insights or clarification kind of as to why the decision was made to stall these discussions, and if they're being planned on taken up kind of before this review, or it's being pushed off further into the future, and if there's any implications of that. Thank you.
One more, perhaps? Sure.
Fritzi Kohler, World Bank. And I would be interested to hear a little bit, because I think it's really remarkable what a stellar performance Panama has really done in the last decade. And what I find interesting in this question is there were a couple of reforms that were possible in Panama, which have not been possible in other countries. And I think they really were a turning point in the story of Panama, and I think this goes beyond the Panama Canal. What do you think are those ingredients? I mean, why is it possible to see these reforms in Panama?
Easy questions for openers.
Okay. The first question, which is regarding crime levels in Panama compared to our regional peers, obviously, with strong economic growth, you have job creation, so you don't have the problems that, for example, countries such as Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala have, and we don't have, a history of civil wars in our country either. So Panama is not a violent society. Obviously, like I mentioned, being a bridge between the drug-producing countries and the drug-consuming countries, there has been, turf wars between some of the drug cartels that have happened in Panama, but crime levels have started decreasing as of 2011 with the strategy that the Ministry of Security has put forth and the investments that we've made in like I mentioned, in security, the radars, the boats to patrol the Panamanian coast. When President Martinelli took office, a part of Panama, which is the Darien province, it's next to Colombia, the FARC would operate there. And now Panama is 100% sovereign in the sense that the FARC do not have presence in Darien as they did before, and that's part of the security investments. We've equipped our police forces to be able to fight. I mean, you can't fight with a 9mm gun against the FARC that have AK-47s. And like I said, we're working closely with our neighboring countries, with Colombia and Mexico, which have had or are having serious problems with drug trafficking with the United States. But crimes such as theft, murder, and things like that are very well below levels in Central America and on par with countries in such as Chile. And you ask if you ask the tourists that visit Panama or anyone who's been to Panama, they know that Panama City is a very safe city. Obviously, as any other large city, there are areas that are dangerous and you just don't go there. But I think overall, Panama and the fact that you have over 90 multinational companies that have established themselves in Panama speaks to the safety that exists in Panama. And regarding to the tax information exchange agreement, when I was Deputy Minister of Economy, was the leader of the effort that Panama has made to be removed from the OECD gray list and pass the first phase of the Global Forum peer review. We presented to our Congress a law. We immobilize bearer shares. However, Congress ends their session at the end of this month, and we're going to renew discussions on the bearer shares when Congress reconvenes in the 1st of July of this year. Obviously, this is something that Panama has to do, but we're, to be honest, getting some pushback from certain large law firms who are dedicated to the business of selling Panamanian corporations. So just so you have an idea, not that the monies that tax evaders use or organize is not in the Panamanian banks. Panamanian banks have a strict KYC policy, and we have a strong anti-money laundering policy. We're going to be presenting before the end of the year a new version of our anti-money laundering law to reinforce it according to the recommendations that the IMF has recently made to Panama. But we feel that obviously if Panama is trying to position itself as a country for foreign direct investment, we want to become remain a strong competitive country regionally, we have to move forward in fiscal transparency. So we are pushing that. The president of Panama should be visiting the OECD the 31st of May, and that's one of the issues that will be addressed. I will be traveling to the OECD on Monday. I leave Saturday, so I have a meeting with the OECD on Monday regarding that process. What reforms has Panama made? I mentioned some of them, the privatizations back in the mid-90s. I think in certain areas there has been a national consensus. For example, the Panama Canal, as by constitution, is autonomous. We try to maintain it away from political intervention. Panama has seen itself as a logistical hub, and there's been consensus also in developing Panama as a strong hub, logistical leader in the Americas. So that's why you see consensus also, for example, in the port and how the port should be managed. We've had every administration since the Moscoso administration, the last 3 administrations, have pushed forward tax reforms also, which has improved, obviously, the tax revenues that the government receives. As a percentage of GDP, it's still low compared to developed countries, but I think that there's obviously room for improvement, but I think that that's another strong reform that the country has moved forward on. The reform that we need to push forward, I think, for Panama to keep growing and to become a first world country is educational reform, and I think we've made a lot, strong headway in that sense, and we hope that the future administrations will continue down that path in educational reform. Panama, as many Latin American countries, has a problem with inequality, income distribution, and one of the ways to attack that is giving people opportunities to do a better educational system.
Others? Sure, Eric.
2 maybe concentrate.
Wait for the mic, Eric. This is Eric Olson from the Latin American
From the Latin
Program.
American Program. On the one hand, I thought I wrote down you said growth was about 10% last year. So normally one would assume also pretty high levels of inflation or potential for inflation at that level of growth. So I wonder if you could talk about that and what the government's doing to mitigate that possibility. The other one, which maybe is an absurd question, but are there any obstacles to economic growth in Panama? I mean, maybe 15% growth is not desirable at some level, but I mean, if there were 1 or 2 things that you could wave a magic wand and change, maybe it's education, I don't know, but.
Correct. Okay. Inflation historically in Panama has been 1.5%, even lower than the United States. And I forgot to mention that Panama is a dollarized country. Panama gained its independence from Colombia back in 1903, and as of 1904, the U.S. dollar is our national. Well, we use the balboa, which is on par with the U.S. dollar. So Panama never suffered the hyperinflation that most of Latin American countries suffered back in the 80s and 90s. But obviously, with strong economic growth, we've seen an increase in inflation. In 2011, inflation was 5.9%. Last year was 5.7%. And as of March of this year, year-on-year inflation is 4.6%. If you ask me as Minister of Finance, I think those levels of inflation are a little higher than what we want, but I'd rather have the problem of inflation and having the problem of growth or job creation. I think for society, that's a much more manageable problem than problems that European countries, for example, are facing. But why are we having these higher than usual inflation? Obviously, strong economic growth. Like I mentioned, we have almost no unemployment, 4%. So there's wage pressure. Panama being a dollarized country would depend on the monetary policy that the Federal Reserve implements, and we're on QE3 already, so obviously the dollar is losing purchasing power, and that affects Panama. We are not strong. We are not a strong agricultural country. We import most of our food, so we're dependent on world food prices. We're not an energy. We don't produce oil, so we're also dependent on international oil prices, which have gone up in the last couple of years. But we feel that inflation this year and in the following years will go back to acceptable levels. We expect inflation to be between 4.5% to 5% this year, and start slowing down to about 3.5% in the next couple of years. And regarding obstacles to growth, I mentioned, when you have almost no unemployment, there's a strong demand for skilled labor. So we've been flexibilizing immigration policy. So professionals in certain areas such as engineering, architects, from over 30 countries such as United States, Spain, mostly developed countries, can come to Panama and get a work permit after 30 days. How do you attack this? Obviously, I mentioned the educational reforms we do. That obviously takes time, but for a short period, for a short-term answer is flexibilizing our immigration. Since we are a service-based economy, we depend obviously on the global economy, our regional economy. So that if there's a slowdown in regional growth, that would affect Panama's economic performance. Fortunately, Latin America as a region has been growing above the global average, and most Latin American countries are producers of commodities, and they are exporting to the Asian markets. And we've seen countries such as Peru, Colombia have very robust economic growth in the last couple of years, and that has helped Panama also, since we export through the Colón Free Zone, and they use the Panama Canal, etc. So I think those would be the obstacles that face Panama in the future for in regards to economic growth.
I have a question. You mentioned energy, and I was wondering if you could describe Panama's energy matrix a little more. With the robustness of the growth, you can obviously import a lot of oil and take care of your needs strictly through imports. I'm wondering if there's any national efforts at diversifying. And related to that, because of Panama's geographic location and the proximity of the two oceans, you're in a very vulnerable position vis-a-vis climate change. And I was wondering what, if any, measures have been taken around climate change adaptation, looking towards the future and what might happen in light of rising sea levels.
Back in 2009, Panama's energy matrix was basically bunker production. We bunker diesel, and that was about 55% of our capacity, and 45% was hydroelectric. As of 2014-15, 80% of our capacity, 85% of our capacity is going to be renewable sources, hydroelectric, wind. We had a bidding process for wind generation that should be up and running by 2014. We have also coal production now. We recently had a bidding process for 300 megas of coal generation, and we're bidding out a concession for natural gas generation, 550 megas in natural gas. So we're working strongly on diversifying our energy matrix, looking for cheaper sources of generation besides, obviously, bunker. Like I mentioned, hydroelectric. Panama, being a tropical country, is one of the strongest sources for energy production, but you can't depend on water generation year-round. And when you have, climate phenomena like El Nino, then obviously you have to have the capacity installed for other sources of generation. So that's why we're, like I mentioned, diversifying our energy matrix, and that will help drive down the cost of energy in the mid and long term. Climate change, Panama, fortunately, has, we don't suffer hurricanes in Panama, such as the Caribbean countries or Central American countries. Earthquakes are very rare, and when they do occur, the intensity, they're 4.5, 5.0 at the most in the Richter scale. So, in that sense, we're not prone to those types of natural disasters. What we have seen in the last couple of years is the increase in intensity of the rains, and we've had problems with flooding in the last couple of years. So what we're working on with the World Bank is strategies that mitigate the impact of climate change. Obviously taking care of humedales. How would you translate that to the humedales, which would be the natural barrier between the ocean and the
dikes or the, what do you call
Barrier
them?
reefs?
Well, the natural
Reefs?
barriers.
not reefs, the trees.
Barrier islands? Mangroves?
Mangroves. Yes. Sorry, my
No? Manglares.
manglares,
Manglares.
mangroves.
For the Caribbean.
Right,
to
manglares, we know that one, but
The mangroves, and moving people from that live next to rivers that now are prone to flooding, so that they're obviously their lives aren't put in danger. Improving our environmental standards, from when you have to have environmental impact studies for development projects. So those are the steps we're taking in mitigating climate change impact.
Oh, one moment. I'm sorry, my bad. There you go.
And I'm really not remembering the details of this at all. So I do recall in the last months or so there was some conflict in Colon, and I don't recall if that had to do with the free zone or the expansion of the Panama. Could you just tell us what that was about and how that was handled and what the situation is?
Sure. The government had the initiative to sell the lands of the Colon Free Zone to the company or the entrepreneurs that operate in the Colon Free Zone. The Colon Free Zone is state-owned land. The entrepreneurs pay a yearly rent to the Colon Free Zone. However, we've had problems in the past. For example, they build warehouses and commercial offices there, and they get financing from a bank. But bankers, they don't feel they are very well protected if they don't also have a lien against the land. And we thought the initiative to sell the land the idea was to create a trust fund for Colon, for that money to be used to improve Colon's infrastructure. There's a need for investment in water treatment and improving the road infrastructure. And there was, public manifestations against the initiative, so the government had to take it off the table.
So it's where it's always been.
Yeah, so the land still remains state-owned, and the entrepreneurs rent it from the government.
wait for a sec for the mic, okay?
Thank you. Peter Knight from the State Department. Can you tell us, besides sort of the infrastructure and hospital education programs that you've already mentioned, with 1 year left in his presidency, how does Martinelli sort of envision wrapping things up? More of the same, or sort of what can we expect in the last year?
Well, what you can expect is the whole government to be concentrated in finishing all these projects that I have mentioned, like the new rail subway system should be open to the public by February or March of next year. We have, like I mentioned, ambitious $14 billion investment program that has been executed in these last 5 years. We also have the Panama Bay cleanup project that has been coming since the Moscoso government. That's almost a $600 million project where we built water treatment plants and collection lines. That first phase should be completed by the end of this year, or the beginning of next year, and we will start the second phase before the end of the government. So I think in that sense, that's the government strategy, to finish our public works that we have. Obviously, we're beginning an electoral process, as you know, elections are in May next year. I think for the first time you have 3 parties with strong possibilities of winning. Panama used to be a 2-party system with smaller satellite parties forming coalitions with these 2 large parties, which are the Panaminista Party and the PRD. Now the Cambio Democrático, which is the Martinelli's party, is the 2nd largest political party in Panama. Polls have the PRD candidate, Juan Carlos Navarro, as the leader in opinion polls as of now, but I think once the government defines who its candidate is going to be, we should see, you know, shifts in public opinion polls. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting, the electoral process. Obviously, Panama's had a democracy since 1989, which was reinstalled after the invasion by the United States to take out Noriega. We've had clean, democratic electoral processes. We've had 4 of them, and we're going to have a 5th one, and whoever wins the polls is going to, whoever wins the elections the 4th of May of 2014 will be president of Panama July 1st of 2014.
Question about CAFTA. How was that affected, Panama?
Well, Panama didn't form part of CAFTA. Panama didn't want to negotiate with the other Central American countries because our economy is completely different than the Central American countries. They're more of an agricultural, industrial economies. Our economy, like I mentioned, is a service-based economy. Panama negotiated a bilateral free trade agreement with the United States, which came into force as of October of last year. The United States is Panama's largest commercial partner. Though I mentioned to the congressman I visited yesterday, the United States has been losing relevance. Other countries have been gaining commercial trade with Panama, countries such as Spain, Colombia, the UK, and we want to have more U.S. companies investing in Panama. So I think with the free trade agreement in place, we are hoping that that will occur. I think there's excellent opportunities for U.S. companies in the logistical sector, you know, in the ports, logistics. I know the Panama Canal Authority had been meeting with, for example, Walmart. So like Walmart would establish a cold storage warehouse in Panama for the products it imports from South America, from Chile, for example, and then distribute it from there to the U.S. So I think we'll see we had before the free trade agreement, we had an investor protection agreement with the United States. Also, I mentioned the tax information exchange agreement. So I think all the instruments are there to maintain strong commercial ties between both of our countries.
Hi, it's Gabriel Hurst from Georgetown University, also an intern here at the Wilson Center. I'm very interested.
About to be a member of the Foreign Service. So.
Yes. I'm very interested in the educational reform. In order to make that possible, is the current tax code in Panama going to have to be changed at all? Because I know that in countries like Chile, for example, the educational reform is really dependent on the tax reform. And so do you see that sort of companies are going to have to be taxed more in order to sort of inject more money into the educational reform to make that a possibility at all?
No. For Panama, it's not a question of quantity and how much we invest in education. The Ministry of Education's budget is the second or third largest of all the central government institutions. It's more of a question of quality. And I think that's where we're focused now. And how do we get more bang for our buck in I mean, we invest. The Ministry of Education's budget is about $1 billion out of a total of $8 billion of the central government's budget. It's how do you modernize our curriculum? How do you incorporate technology into education? I forgot to mention that we also implemented a laptop for high school students. Each one gets a laptop for their personal use. And Panama is one of the few countries that has nationwide Wi-Fi. We have over 1,200 hotspots in the main population areas where people can, connect themselves to the internet. We've been working with Microsoft and using Microsoft tools in education as well. So educational reform does not depend on new taxes, but like I said, what we need to do is become much more efficient in the money we invest in education and make sure that what we invest, that the quality of the education is on par with what we're investing in education.
Can I ask you sort of a general question?
Sure.
This is probably reaching beyond your portfolio, but since I know the brief on this, you live in between Central America and South America. There's a lot going on in the entire region. How do you see the architecture of the Americas shaping out over the next few years? I mean, there's been an attempt to create a more of a South American unit. Some people say we should be reinforcing the OAS. Some people are looking for an alternative that might be just Latin American and Caribbean countries. Where do you see things going? And
Politically
politically
or economically?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, and those intersect. So.
Yeah, obviously. Well, from an economic perspective, we're seeing integration in Central America. Central America signed an agreement with the European community, so Panama is part of that integration process. You see regional integration also in South America with obviously the Mercosur and then you have ALBA. But I think as a region and studies that the World Bank has done and the IDB has done, intra-country trading in Latin America as a whole is not on par with other economic blocs such as the Asian blocs or European or obviously the 50 states of the United States. And that's something we need to work on. I think there are factors. There's a lot of opportunity. For example, in Central America, the reason that there's not much trade between Central American countries is that the cost of transportation is so high that it's just not feasible. I think, for example, the IDB did a study of pineapple produced or banana produced in Central America, the cost structure of it getting it to the consumer market in Europe or the United States. 40% of the total cost structure is transportation. So we have to work strongly integration, physical integration of the region, improving road infrastructures, port systems. And that's why Panama as a country has been investing heavily in this. But we need to do this as a region. You have geographic limitations or impediments in South America, for example. You have the Amazon jungle, you have the mountain, the Cordillera, what's the Andes. Sorry, thank you. My went blank. That makes it hard for trade to happen between, for example, Chile and Argentina, or Colombia and Brazil. Politically, I think with what's happened, obviously in Venezuela, we have to see what's going to happen with the access that Venezuelan influenced countries had. For example, Nicaragua, what's going to happen in Nicaragua, what's going to happen in Bolivia, Ecuador, Cuba. You have the Pacific Rim. Panama wants to become part of the United States. Mexico, Chile are trying to form a Pacific Rim alliance also. But I think we're far off.
Part of that.
No, Panama's going to become an observer and wants to become part of that.
The TPP or
In the Pacific Alliance,
Oh, in the Pacific
Mexico,
Alliance, yeah.
Colombia, Peru, Chile.
But I think a regional total regional integration is far off in the future because of, like I mentioned, geographic reasons, economic reasons, and political reasons. I'm not an expert, so
No, that's great.
my personal opinion.
We have one final question
Algo
before we end,
más?
or this is your chance. Speak now or forever hold your peace, as they say.
Well, please join us in thanking
Well, thank you very much.
Minister de Lima. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much.
I have to go back to my office to get a business card.
Sure.
Did you have one?